Hi and welcome to DJFonts tutorials. Today we're going to look at the gradient fill effect, which is one of the layer effects that you can use to affect a layer in your DJ font. And I'm going to show you first of all how it works, and then I'll show you 3 different ways that you can use it. So just to show you how it works, I'm going to turn off all these layers and just start with one simple layer. And I'm going to turn off all the other effects on that layer, and I'm going to choose Gradient Fill. Now what Gradient Fill does is it creates a gradient which will fill the area of that layer. Almost like a solid fill, but this will be a gradient of colors that you can choose. And when you open the Gradient Fill effect here, you can see that you can set your own colors, and you have a start color and an end color, but then you can also add colors in between, so you can sort of sway what colors will be more dominant. So if I just set up a simple gradient here from green to yellow, I'm just selecting colors from this color picker, and when you add a color, the gradient fill will automatically choose something that's in between the colors either side of it. So then you can go and customize that. So here I've got a simple green gradient with a horizon line in it. And not only can you assign colors like that, but you can also swing the gradient so that it's diagonal or horizontal, any direction you want. And as I mentioned, you can sway which color has dominance by moving these colors around. Now another thing to keep in mind is this gradient fill area has to be applicable to any letter in the font. So for example, this dark green up here is not showing up because it has to be able to be applied to all letters, all characters in this font, whether they have ascenders or descenders. For example, a descender like on a G or a J or a P. So you might have to adjust how the gradient appears depending on the characters you're using. So this is pretty simple, how to create a gradient and play around with it and see how it applies to the text that you've created. Now you can also browse the gradient library and choose from our preset gradients, and if you find one you like, then you select apply. Let's choose something similar to what we had here. So I'm just going to say apply, and as you see, that brings it here into the gradient fill area. Now besides smooth gradient effects, you can move colors closer together to create a harder edge between them, which gives you some interesting graphic kinds of effects. You can also change your gradient from linear to radial depending on what you need. Linear will just be a straight line. Radial will radiate from the start color out to the end color. So you can see how that would affect the character that you're creating here. Now, when you use gradient fill effects, one use is as a background, and then you can put stuff on top. That's your base with the gradient, and now if I take this hairy base, I can add that as a screen on top, and I still see my gradient behind it. It just depends what you're looking for. Here, for example, if I turn that hairy off, we've got a very graphic pattern, and I could go in and adjust my gradient. Maybe make it a linear gradient instead. And we're getting something safari looking. So that's a way to create your own base colors that you can use either alone or in combination with other layers. Once you have a gradient that you like the look of, as with most effects in DJFonts in the juicer, you can then save that effect as a preset. So if we call this jungle green, we can then use that in other projects down the line, and that will be added to the gradient library in the My Gradient folder. So if I click on here, then I have that instantly accessible. I can apply it again to my next project. So that's one way you can use the gradient fill effect as a background fill in combination with other layers. But one of the more powerful ways to use it is as a way to add highlights and shadows to another layer or a complete font look. And to show you that, I'm going to bring in a different font from the brick wall font family. And I'm just going to come up here to the top, and I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to choose a layer that's going to give me the shape of the letter, which is going to be the wall layer. And then I'm going to come over here to Effects, and I'm going to say Gradient Fill. Now that will replace that brick texture that was there as the fill for this letter. Now here I'm going to choose black for my end color, and I'm going to choose white for my start color. And what I'm looking for here is a highlight on this letter as if it's shining down onto the brick wall. And there are a couple of ways you can use this. You can either take this simple gradient and then just change the blending mode to something like screen, and that will only allow the white to lighten up the wall. And that's pretty useful. It gives you the right effect. And you could also do the same thing with multiply and have only a shadow in the lower corner. Or you could use overlay and you'd get both a highlight and a shadow. But I'm also going to show you how you can use the gradient fill controls to do something a little different. So if I put this back into normal mode, the white and black, we can adjust their opacity. So if I only want that highlight, I can put the black into 0% opacity, which essentially means my gradient is now white to transparent. And so I don't need to worry about the black bleeding onto my letter at all. And I could either just leave it in normal mode, or I could go and do an overlay or a screen. I'll set this to overlay, and then I'll do a duplicate of that layer and put the duplicate in screen mode. It'll give me a nice lighting effect as if there's a light shining down on here. So that's one interesting way to use gradients that's not just filling an area with color. Another way that you can use it is as a kind of a masking tool for other effects. In this example here, let's say we want a letter that goes from the pink fur to the blue fur. So I'm just going to have to come in here and turn off that yellow layer, and I'm going to turn off the offset on the pink. So now our letters are laying one on top of each other. And above this blue layer, I'm going to create a new layer, and I want it to be the same size as those other color bases. So that's the feather base, which is the large letter shape. And again, I'm going to come in here to my Effects button and choose Gradient Fill. And again, I'm going to go from black to white. And I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer from normal to cut through below. And what that's going to do is it's going to cut away the layer below. But first I have to change that white to 0% opacity. Now you'll see my mask is black to transparent. So depending on where I place that black color and how far I move the white to it, we have a smooth gradient from blue to pink by masking the blue onto the pink. And that's something you really can't do any other way in here with these fonts. So it's a pretty powerful thing to be able to do with the gradient fill effect. To give you another idea of how this effect can work with a mask from the gradient fill, I'm going to convert this blue layer and turn off the colorize, and I'm going to give it a texture fill. And I'm going to choose a texture from the library. And as you can see, the texture is only appearing in this upper area. Now, if I reverse that gradient and do 100% white and 0% black, now I'm having my texture only appear in the bottom area. So this is a great way to blend in a texture in a specific area only instead of having it affect the whole letter. Let's try a different texture. Here we can have those bars appear only on the bottom half of the letter. And you don't have to always go 100%. You can have degrees of having the texture show through. So those are just 3 simple ways you can use the gradient fill effect. The first one is just to fill an area with a range of colors. The second is to add highlights and shadows in areas where you don't already have them without actually touching a paintbrush or a paint program. And then the third way is to use the gradient as a mask to blend layers quite simply by using a color to transparent gradient. So that's a quick look at the gradient fill tool, and it'll help you a lot when you're playing around and creating your own new custom fonts. So I'll see you next time in the next tutorial.